For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On the morning of June 15, 1994, 26-year-old Olivia Fisher set out from her campsite along Peru's historic Inca Trail, camera in hand, eager to capture the sunrise at an ancient sacred site. She never returned. Despite an extensive search operation across the rugged Andean terrain, involving local authorities, indigenous guides, and fellow hikers, Olivia seemed to have vanished into the mystical landscape she so passionately studied. For 15 years, her family and academic colleagues at the University of Michigan lived with haunting questions about the promising anthropology student's fate. Then, in 2009, a discovery in a remote mountain cave would unravel a dark web of deception stretching from the mist-shrouded peaks of Machu Picchu to the shadowy underworld of international antiquities trafficking. This is the complete investigation into what happened to Olivia Fisher and how her own research would ultimately speak for the dead. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this content, consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Now let's continue. In the early hours of June 15, 1994, a thick mist clung to the ancient Inca Trail as 26-year-old Olivia Fisher stepped out of her tent. The University of Michigan anthropology student shouldered her camera bag and whispered to her guide, Eduardo Vargas, that she was heading to the nearby ridge to photograph the sunrise. It would be the last time anyone would see her alive. The morning held promise for Olivia, who had spent the past 3 days documenting potential trade routes for her doctoral dissertation. Her research focused on the lesser-known sacred sites along the path to Machu Picchu, and she had been particularly excited about capturing the first light touching the stone ruins that dotted the mountainside. 2 hours later, when Olivia hadn't returned for breakfast, concern began to spread through the small camp. Vargas, an experienced guide who had led hundreds of treks along the historic trail, organized an initial search of the immediate area. At the edge of a steep cliff, approximately half a mile from camp, they found Olivia's Canon camera, its strap caught on a jutting rock. The discovery sparked immediate alarm among the group. Lieutenant Marco Delgado of the Peruvian National Police would later note in his report that the morning's heavy mist had reduced visibility to less than 15 feet, creating treacherous conditions along the narrow mountain paths. The possibility of a fatal fall seemed all too plausible, yet no trace of Olivia could be found in the ravine below. As word of the disappearance spread, local search and rescue teams converged on the area. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their sound echoing off the ancient stone terraces, while ground teams carefully combed the steep terrain. Dr. Susan Garcia, Olivia's dissertation advisor, received the news in Michigan and immediately flew to Peru, bringing with her detailed maps of the sites Olivia had planned to visit. The first 48 hours proved crucial yet frustrating. The search area expanded to cover a 5-mile radius, but the challenging topography of the Andes presented countless places where a person could vanish without a trace. Local villagers joined the effort, their knowledge of the mountain paths proving invaluable, yet even they found themselves baffled by the complete absence of clues. Olivia's parents, watching the search unfold from their home in Seattle, could only piece together their daughter's final moments through the photographs recovered from her camera. The last image, taken at 5:43 a.m., showed the first hint of dawn breaking over distant peaks. The composition was perfect, revealing both Olivia's artistic eye and her scholarly attention to detail. In the frame's corner, a partial shadow suggested she had set up for another shot. That shot would never be taken. The camera, when found, had its lens cap still attached, as if Olivia had carefully prepared it for transport before vanishing. This detail would later prove significant to investigators, contradicting the initial theory of a sudden fall. As the first day of searching turned into the second, hope began to fade. The Inca Trail, while well-traveled, bordered vast stretches of wilderness. Temperatures dropped sharply at night, and the June weather brought frequent rain showers that complicated rescue efforts. Search dogs lost and regained scent, leading teams in circles through the mist-shrouded mountains. By the end of the second day, Lieutenant Delgado had interviewed every member of Olivia's trekking group. All told similar stories. Olivia had been enthusiastic, well-prepared, and notably careful on the trail. None had noticed anything unusual about her behavior the night before her disappearance. She had shared her plans for the sunrise shoot with several people, including detailed notes about the specific angles she hoped to capture. The morning of June 17 brought clear skies but no answers. As searchers gathered for their third day of operations, no one could have predicted that the truth behind Olivia Fisher's disappearance would remain hidden for 15 years, buried in a remote cave, along with evidence of a crime that went far beyond the tragedy of a young researcher's death. The initial investigation into Olivia Fisher's disappearance quickly revealed the complexities of pursuing a missing persons case in one of Peru's most challenging terrains. Lieutenant Marco Delgado arrived at the makeshift command center on June 18, his weathered face betraying concern as he reviewed the preliminary search data. The veteran officer had investigated numerous incidents along the Inca Trail, but something about this case immediately struck him as unusual. During his first day on site, Delgado conducted extensive interviews with each member of the trekking party. Sarah Chen, a fellow graduate student who had shared a tent with Olivia 2 nights before, recalled their last conversation. Olivia was excited about some markings she'd found that didn't appear on any official maps. She kept checking her notes, comparing them to something in her research journal. The investigation team meticulously photographed the area where Olivia's camera had been discovered. The rock formation where the camera strap had caught showed no signs of disturbance or struggle. More telling was the careful placement of the lens cap, suggesting a deliberate action rather than a panicked moment or accidental fall. Dr. Susan Garcia arrived from Michigan carrying Olivia's research proposals and preliminary dissertation notes. As she spread the documents across a folding table in the command tent, a pattern emerged. Olivia had been systematically documenting discrepancies between official archaeological surveys and the actual conditions of various sites along the trail. Her notes referenced unauthorized excavation evidence at several points along their planned route. The weather continued to hamper investigation efforts. Dense fog rolled in each morning, limiting visibility and forcing search teams to wait until mid-morning to begin their work. The steep terrain created dangerous conditions for the investigators, who had to rope together as they examined the cliff faces and narrow ledges where Olivia might have fallen. Lieutenant Delgado's attention increasingly focused on the hours before Olivia's disappearance. The guide, Eduardo Vargas, had provided a detailed account of their last interaction, describing Olivia as calm and focused on her photography plans. Yet when questioned about specific sites mentioned in Olivia's notes, Vargas seemed unusually vague, attributing his uncertainty to the large number of tours he had led over the years. Local villagers brought their own perspectives to the investigation. Several mentioned increased activity along rarely used mountain paths over the previous months, though none could provide specific details. Their knowledge of the area's hidden caves and ancient shortcuts proved invaluable to the search efforts, even as it highlighted the vast number of places where evidence could remain concealed. As the investigation entered its second week, forensic experts analyzed soil samples from the area where the camera was found. They discovered trace evidence of recent activity, but could not definitively connect it to Olivia's disappearance. The absence of any personal effects beyond the camera itself presented another puzzling aspect of the case. Dr. Garcia's insights proved particularly valuable as she helped investigators understand the significance of Olivia's research. The young anthropologist had been developing a theory about undocumented trade routes that connected various sacred sites. Her work had potential implications for understanding both the region's history and its modern archaeological preservation efforts. The investigation took an unexpected turn when several local guides reported that some of their regular rest stops appeared disturbed, with signs of recent digging activity. Lieutenant Delgado ordered detailed mappings of these locations, though the connection to Olivia's disappearance remained unclear. The sites corresponded to several locations marked in Olivia's research notes, but without more evidence, investigators could only speculate about the significance. As June drew to a close, the investigation began to stall. Despite extensive searches, interviews, and forensic analysis, Olivia Fisher's fate remained a mystery. Lieutenant Delgado found himself facing the difficult task of scaling back the search operation while maintaining an active investigation. The case would remain open, but the mountain had kept its secrets, at least for now. No one could have predicted that the truth lay hidden in a cave, waiting 15 years to be discovered. The summer of 1994 faded into autumn, and still, Olivia Fisher's disappearance remained unexplained. As the seasonal rains intensified along the Inca Trail, the once bustling command center gradually emptied, leaving only a small team of local police to continue the investigation. Lieutenant Delgado maintained his office in Cusco as a hub for any new information, but leads had grown scarce. Patricia and Robert Fisher, Olivia's parents, refused to leave Peru for nearly 2 months, hoping against hope for news of their daughter. They walked the markets of Cusco with photographs, spoke to every guide they could find, and hired private investigators to pursue even the faintest possibilities. Eventually, with their resources depleted and their hearts heavy, they returned to Seattle, leaving behind a network of local contacts who promised to keep searching. Dr. Susan Garcia threw herself into analyzing Olivia's research, convinced that understanding her students' academic work might reveal crucial clues about her disappearance. She spent countless hours in her Michigan office, poring over copies of Olivia's preliminary notes and comparing them with known archaeological surveys of the region. The work became both a memorial to her student and a desperate search for answers. Tourism along the Inca Trail changed in the wake of Olivia's disappearance. Guide services implemented stricter safety protocols, requiring hikers to travel in pairs and establishing mandatory check-in points along the route. Eduardo Vargas continued leading tour, his familiar presence a constant reminder of the tragedy that had occurred under his watch. He spoke often of Olivia to other guides, describing her as a dedicated researcher who had simply ventured too far in pursuit of knowledge. The investigation file grew thick with false leads and dead ends. A backpacker from Germany reported finding a camera similar to Olivia's, but it proved to belong to another tourist. Local villagers occasionally reported strange sounds or lights in the mountains, sending search teams on exhausting expeditions that yielded nothing. Each disappointment seemed to push the truth further into shadow. By the end of 1994, the case had settled into the rhythm of a long-term missing persons investigation. Monthly reports crossed Lieutenant Delgado's desk, each one thinner than the last. The official theory remained that Olivia had fallen from an unsearched section of cliff, her body lost to the rugged terrain. Yet Delgado could never quite convince himself that this explanation accounted for all the peculiarities of the case. The years began to pass. Each June, a small group would gather at the University of Michigan's anthropology department to remember Olivia. Dr. Garcia would share stories of her brilliant student, and colleagues would discuss the potential impact of her unfinished research. In Peru, local guides pointed out the spot where her camera had been found, the story becoming part of the trail's complex history. The Fisher family established a scholarship in Olivia's name, supporting graduate students studying Andean archaeology. They never gave up hope of finding answers, but they channeled their grief into ensuring that other young researchers could continue the work their daughter had loved. Each year, they received a brief update from the Peruvian police, always ending with the same phrase: investigation ongoing. Lieutenant Delgado kept Olivia's file in his active cases drawer, even as newer investigations demanded his attention. Something about the case nagged at him: the careful placement of the camera, the missing research journal, the vague responses from certain witnesses when questioned about specific locations along the trail. But without new evidence, these concerns remained merely instincts without proof. For 15 years, the mystery of Olivia Fisher's disappearance seemed destined to remain unsolved, another tragic tale in the long history of the Andes. The mountains kept their secret, while time gradually transformed her story from current events to local legend. No one could have predicted that the truth lay waiting in a hidden cave, preserved alongside the very artifacts her research had sought to protect, or that when the answers finally emerged, they would reveal a crime far more deliberate than anyone had imagined. On a misty morning in March 2009, two local shepherds, following a stray goat into an obscure mountain crevice, made the discovery that would finally break open the 15-year-old mystery of Olivia Fisher's disappearance. The narrow opening, barely visible behind a cascade of vines, led to a cave system that had remained hidden from the thousands of tourists who passed within 100 yards of it each year. Inside the cave, beneath layers of dirt and debris, lay a collection that stunned even the most seasoned investigators. Scattered among carefully arranged pre-Columbian artifacts were the skeletal remains of a young woman, still clothed in fragments of weathered hiking gear. A rotted leather bag contained a water-damaged journal, its pages filled with familiar handwriting that would soon be confirmed as Olivia Fisher's. Lieutenant Delgado, now nearing retirement, arrived at the scene within hours of receiving the call. The cave's contents told a story far different from the accidental fall theory that had dominated discussions for 15 years. Dozens of ancient artifacts, from ceremonial masks to intricately carved figurines, were arranged on crude wooden shelves. Their presence suggested a sophisticated operation for storing and presumably selling illegally excavated treasures. Forensic anthropologists worked methodically to document and recover Olivia's remains. The position of the bones and the surrounding evidence pointed to a violent death rather than an accident. A fracture pattern on the skull matched the shape of a distinctive rock found nearby, covered in traces of long-dried blood that would later prove to be Olivia's. The journal provided the most damning evidence. In her final entries, Olivia had documented her growing suspicion about unauthorized excavations along the trail. She had noticed fresh dirt at several sites that appeared on no official maps, and her detailed sketches matched locations where artifacts had been reported missing. Most significantly, she had noted seeing familiar faces at different dig sites, including one she referred to only as E.V. UNESCO Heritage Crimes investigator Carlos Mendoza arrived to assess the stolen artifacts. His preliminary estimate placed their value at over $2 million, representing one of the largest recoveries of looted Incan artifacts in recent history. The collection included rare ceremonial objects that had been stripped from sacred sites along the trail, many of which corresponded directly with locations marked in Olivia's research notes. The cave itself showed signs of regular use over many years. Hidden compartments had been carved into the walls, presumably for storing the most valuable pieces before transport. Investigators found modern tools, carefully wrapped in oilcloth to prevent rust, alongside packaging material suitable for shipping delicate artifacts. The operation spoke of professional experience and intimate knowledge of the trail system. Dr. Garcia flew to Peru upon hearing the news, bringing with her copies of Olivia's original research proposals. Reading through the recovered journal pages in the police station, she found herself following her students' thought process as Olivia pieced together the evidence of systematic looting. The final entries revealed not just academic curiosity, but growing alarm, as she realized the scale of the theft taking place along the trail. The discovery sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. The cave contained artifacts from at least 12 different sites, some of which had been considered undisturbed for centuries. The careful documentation in Olivia's journal provided crucial evidence linking the items to their original locations, making both their historical significance and their illegal removal undeniable. Local villagers, speaking to investigators, recalled unusual nighttime activity along the remote paths during the early 1990s. Several mentioned seeing loaded mules being led down mountain trails in the pre-dawn hours, though fear or complicity had kept them silent. Now, with Olivia's remains discovered, these memories took on new significance in the investigation. As forensic teams continued their careful examination of the cave, each new finding added weight to a terrible conclusion. Olivia Fisher had not died in a tragic accident. She had stumbled upon something far more sinister, and her death had been merely the beginning of a story that would take 15 years to fully emerge from the mountain shadows. The discovery of the cave transformed what had been a cold case into an urgent, active investigation. Carlos Mendoza, UNESCO's heritage crimes investigator, arrived in Cusco with decades of experience tracking stolen artifacts across South America. His weathered face betrayed no emotion as he surveyed the evidence spread across Lieutenant Delgado's office. But his methodical note-taking spoke of a man who recognized the gravity of what lay before him. Olivia's recovered journal became the foundation of the new investigation. Each page revealed more details about the systematic looting she had unwittingly documented. Her precise sketches and locations matched perfectly with reports of missing artifacts that had accumulated over the years. More disturbing were her observations of regular activity at these sites, particularly during pre-dawn hours when most tourists were still asleep in their tents. The investigation team began building a detailed timeline of Eduardo Vargas's activities throughout the early 1990s. His work records showed an unusual pattern of requesting specific routes and dates, often coinciding with periods when certain artifacts disappeared from their original locations. Bank records revealed irregular deposits far exceeding a guide's typical income, though carefully structured to avoid immediate suspicion. Local villagers, more willing to speak after 15 years had passed, shared stories of seeing Vargas's mule train moving along rarely used mountain paths during odd hours. One elderly shepherd recalled helping him clear a fallen tree from a narrow track, noting the careful way Vargas had protected the loaded bags on his mules. At the time, he had assumed they contained camping supplies. Dr. Garcia's analysis of Olivia's research proved invaluable to the investigation. Her students' academic work had inadvertently created a detailed map of the looting operation. Each site Olivia had marked for its archaeological significance aligned with locations where artifacts had vanished. The young anthropologist had been reconstructing the pieces of a criminal enterprise without realizing the danger it posed to her. Mendoza's examination of the recovered artifacts revealed a sophisticated understanding of the illegal antiquities market. The pieces had been carefully selected for their value and portability, suggesting someone with both archaeological knowledge and commercial connections. The cave's location, while remote, provided easy access to routes leading away from the tourist areas and toward private airfields. The investigation team established surveillance on Vargas's current activities, discovering that despite Olivia's death, the artifact trafficking had continued. Though more careful now, he still maintained contact with known dealers in stolen antiquities. His phone records showed regular calls to numbers associated with black market art collectors in Europe and North America. Lieutenant Delgado, working with Mendoza, began mapping the full extent of the trafficking network. The operation stretched far beyond one guide selling stolen artifacts. It involved corrupt officials who provided documentation, specialists who authenticated the pieces, and an international network of buyers. At the center of it all was Vargas, whose intimate knowledge of the trail system had made it all possible. The evidence mounted steadily. Soil samples from the cave matched locations where artifacts had been reported missing. Tool marks on the cave walls matched equipment found in Vargas's home. Most damning were the blood traces on the rock that had ended Olivia's life, preserved in the cave's dry environment for 15 years. As spring turned to summer in 2009, the investigation reached a critical phase. Olivia's detailed notes had provided not just evidence of the looting, but a clear motive for her murder. Her final journal entries showed she had begun to understand the scope of the operation. She had planned to report her findings to UNESCO upon returning from the trail, a report that would never be filed. The investigation team worked carefully to avoid alerting Vargas to their progress. They knew that one wrong move could send him fleeing into the network of contacts he had built over 2 decades of illegal trading. Yet with each passing day, the evidence grew stronger, drawing an ever tighter circle around the man who had maintained his innocence for 15 years, while continuing to profit from the very crimes that had led to Olivia Fisher's death. In late June 2009, the pieces of the 15-year-old puzzle finally aligned. Lieutenant Delgado and Carlos Mendoza sat in a dimly lit office in Cusco, reviewing the mounting evidence against Eduardo Vargas. On the wall, a detailed map marked every location where Olivia Fisher's research notes intersected with reports of missing artifacts. The pattern was undeniable. DNA analysis had confirmed what investigators long suspected. The blood traces found on the cave's murder weapon belonged to Olivia. More telling were the microscopic fibers trapped in the rock's crevices, matching the distinctive blue wool sweater she had worn the morning of her disappearance. The scientific evidence transformed suspicion into certainty. Vargas's carefully constructed world began to unravel when financial investigators uncovered a series of Swiss bank accounts. The deposits aligned perfectly with known sales of Incan artifacts in European markets. Each transaction told part of a story of systematic looting that had made Vargas a wealthy man while destroying irreplaceable cultural heritage. Olivia's recovered journal proved to be the key that unlocked the case. Her final entry, dated June 14, 1994, revealed her growing awareness of the trafficking operation. "The fresh excavation marks appear professional," she had written. EV's explanations about natural erosion don't match the tool marks I've documented. Tomorrow I'll photograph the site at sunrise before anyone else is awake. The investigation team tracked Vargas's movements through years of tour records. His preferred routes created a map of vulnerability, remote archaeological sites, hidden caves, and secret paths perfect for moving stolen artifacts. Cross-referencing these routes with Olivia's research showed how close she had come to exposing the entire operation. Local villagers, now willing to speak freely, provided crucial testimony. Maria Hueman, an elderly woman who lived near the trail, recalled seeing Vargas leading heavily laden mules down unmarked paths in the pre-dawn hours. Her account matched dozens of similar statements, each adding another thread to the tapestry of evidence. The breakthrough came when investigators discovered Vargas had maintained detailed records of his own. Hidden behind a false wall in his home, they found notebooks documenting every artifact he had stolen and sold. The meticulous entries revealed not just his crimes, but his connections to an international network of antiquities traffickers. Dr. Garcia's analysis of Olivia's research methodology proved crucial in understanding how the young anthropologist had unknowingly documented the criminal enterprise. Her systematic approach to mapping unregistered sites had created a perfect record of Vargas's illegal excavations. The very thoroughness that made her an excellent scholar had also sealed her fate. As pressure mounted, Vargas's carefully maintained facade began to crack. Security cameras captured him making late-night visits to remote storage facilities. Phone records showed increasingly frantic calls to known artifacts dealers. His behavior suggested a man who sensed the walls closing in. The final piece fell into place when forensic analysts matched soil samples from Vargas's boots to the cave where Olivia's remains were found. The distinctive mineral composition created an irrefutable link between the guide and the murder site. Combined with the financial evidence, the archaeological documentation, and Olivia's own testimony from beyond the grave, the case was now so. Lieutenant Delgado knew the time had come to act. 15 years of patience, careful investigation, and accumulated evidence had led to this moment. The truth about Olivia Fisher's death would finally emerge, bringing justice not only for her murder but for decades of plundered cultural heritage. The mountain had kept its secrets for 15 years, but now those secrets would see the light of day, and Eduardo Vargas would face the consequences of his actions. On a cool morning in July 2009, Eduardo Vargas sat in the Cusco police station, his weathered hands trembling as he finally spoke the words that would bring closure to a 15-year mystery. His confession, delivered in a quiet voice that barely carried across the interview room, detailed how he had killed Olivia Fisher when she stumbled upon his artifact trafficking operation. The truth emerged in painful detail. Vargas described following Olivia to the ridge that fatal morning, watching as she photographed not just the sunrise, but the fresh excavation marks that threatened to expose his criminal enterprise. When she turned and saw him approaching, she had already understood too much. The fatal blow was quick, delivered with a rock he had grabbed in panic. He had hidden her body in the cave that served as his storage facility, never imagining that 15 years later, the same cave would reveal his crimes to the world. The recovery operation that followed Vargas's confession became one of the largest cultural heritage restoration projects in Peru's history. UNESCO teams worked methodically to document and return over $2 million worth of artifacts to their rightful locations. Each piece told a story of cultural theft, from delicate ceremonial vessels to intricately carved stone figures that had been torn from their sacred sites. Patricia and Robert Fisher flew to Peru one final time, not to search for their daughter, but to bring her home. In a private ceremony at the base of Machu Picchu, they scattered some of her ashes, fulfilling her wish to remain connected to the mountains she had loved. The rest they carried back to Seattle, where her memory would be honored through the scholarship foundation that bore her name. The impact of the case reached far beyond one family's tragedy. The Peruvian government implemented stringent new regulations for guide certification, requiring extensive background checks and regular monitoring of all personnel working along archaeological routes. The tourist industry adapted, incorporating cultural heritage protection awareness into every trek briefing. Dr. Susan Garcia ensured that Olivia's research would not be lost to time. Her meticulous notes, recovered from the cave, were published posthumously in a leading anthropology journal. The paper, detailing previously unknown aspects of Incan trade routes, became required reading for students studying Andean archaeology. Olivia's work, though cut tragically short, had made a lasting contribution to the field she loved. Lieutenant Delgado personally supervised the return of artifacts to their original sites. Each placement required careful documentation and restoration work, attempting to heal the wounds inflicted on Peru's cultural heritage. The process took months, but slowly, sacred places began to feel whole again. Local communities established volunteer guardian programs to protect their archaeological treasures, turning the tragedy into a catalyst for positive change. Vargas received a 30-year sentence for murder and cultural heritage destruction. His trafficking network, exposed through his detailed records, led to dozens of additional arrests across 3 continents. Art dealers, corrupt officials, and international smugglers found themselves facing justice, their carefully constructed world of illegal antiquities trading crumbling under the weight of evidence that Olivia's death had ultimately brought to light. The case transformed how archaeological sites were protected worldwide. UNESCO used the investigation as a model for heritage crime prevention, implementing new protocols for site monitoring and guide verification. The organization established the Olivia Fisher Memorial Grant, funding research projects focused on protecting cultural heritage sites from looting and trafficking. Today, hikers along the Inca Trail pass a small memorial plaque near the spot where Olivia's camera was found. It bears a simple inscription in Spanish and English, "SH, in memory of Olivia Fisher, whose dedication to understanding the past helped protect it for the future." The morning mist still clings to the ancient stones, but now the path she walked serves as both a reminder of loss and a symbol of preservation, ensuring that the cultural treasures she died protecting will remain safe for generations to come.